I don't want this to come across as if you have a crystal ball somewhere on you. But I do want to ask you sort of some of the granular components to the narratives. And I think when I looked at the list of 55 evergreen narratives that you had, and I'll put it on the screen for you because I don't want to rattle them all off. But I saw, some of them are a little convoluted in terms of like what it all encompasses, but some of them are pretty cut and dry. And one of them just said Trump. It's impossible to ignore his impact that he has on the news cycle specifically. So I'm curious to know what you see from your vantage point as an academic, but also tracking the numbers and seeing what people are talking about and how he impacts this index.
Look, I think every administration has impacts narratives. Okay, sometimes they decide on the narratives, right? Their action. That's what the administration does. Of course, that's their job. I mean, so when things happen like the Rose Garden speech back in April 2nd, 2025, immediately our measures picked up the trade war and tariffs. That was the peak day. That week was the peak week in terms of trade tensions. But there was discussion on trade tension for a while.
Leading into that.
And we look at the first Trump administration, also 2016 to 2018, there's a lot of discussion about trade war. Then the Biden administration, that narrative went away. There's nothing. And then when Trump got elected again, then again you saw that drift and elevation in that narrative. So what our system does is automatically updates and realizes that there's this trend. If this trend happens 2, 3, 4 months, you're going to start seeing trades that are supposed to mimic the continuation of that narrative. So in other words, when assets that seem to be outperforming, when there's a lot of discussion about trade war, these are the assets that are going to be in the portfolio. And so what happened in that event, yes, you saw a discussion and then the Rose Garden, and then that whole thing kind of took off. Same thing happened with at least 2 more events. One was the inflation in 2022. Inflation happened at the beginning of 2022, we started recording inflation. But the discussion on inflation happened already in 2021.
Because it's the questions of, will this action cause inflation?
And so people talked about it a lot, but they didn't really adjust their expectations yet. And so that's because people are slow to move on that. Again, the strategy did really well with that. Same thing with the recent military escalation. There was discussion of military escalation throughout Q4 and beginning of Q1. So once we start, automatically the system is gauging that, here's more discussion about military escalation, right? And international conflict. And so when it actually happened, again, the strategy did really well during that time. Again, but at some point, the strategy also did well when there was less discussion of labor concerns. So when you think about at the beginning of the year, people thought, maybe we're going to have issues with jobs. A lot of people talked about.
Yeah.
And yes, there was job cuts, but actually there were also job increases. And so at some point after January, the discussion on labor and concerns was mitigated. So when a narrative starts dropping in attention, that's also a signal. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's not only when narratives go up, it's also every time that they significantly change, it signals something to the strategy. So suddenly if there's less labor concerns and that happens over a period of a few months, then the strategy will adjust accordingly.
Yeah, the big marker for you guys is movement, is difference, right? Is when things change in narratives, correct?
If the narrative stays the same, you will see no
news.
There's going to be no trading. Even if it's highly elevated or it's low. So if let's say there's constant news about military escalation. If that happens in the next 6 months and there's all the time high news about military escalation, when we're going to get into that strategy, of course, when it starts changing. But if it's flat, even at high level, there's going to be no change. Only when it starts dropping, that's when we'll see an adjustment in the portfolio.
For more impactful conversations, click here. And to subscribe to our YouTube channel, click here. And would it kill you to watch a House Rules? They're great, and they're right here.